Hi guys, hope you're well. So today we are talking about the rebirth of a watch that died off in the quartz crisis. Now, if you don't know about the quartz crisis, Google it. It's quite a fascinating, interesting time. And what they've done with this particular watch is they've stood true to what it was like in the 1950s, and they've brought out, in essence, a modern version of the replica from back then. We're talking about the NIVADA GRENCHEN. Well, to give it its full title, I've written this one down. The Chronomaster Aviator Sea Diver Broad Arrow 8600 1A. So not to be mistaken with a ton of other variations of this watch that they have, but I think this is the original version. And for me personally, it's the best looking. Now, among all my watch friends and people that I talk to, this has been one of the most loved watches. They've had a real interest, a real genuine interest to look at it and try it on. And I tell you how much so, I was in a Cartier boutique in Manchester, and the guy at the other end of the counter wanted to look at wanted to look at my watch, and he actually took a photo of it. So it's got real intriguing qualities. Looks the business. It doesn't feel like you're wearing a vintage watch. It looks like you're wearing a vintage watch, and the sizings, they complement that as well because it's only a 38.9mm watch. So these guys, NIVADA GRENCHEN, they started in 1926, and the watch that we're talking about today, this absolute little cracker, was out in the 1950s. But as a lot of brands back then, by the 1980s, hit a brick wall, hit whatever you want. It was the quartz crisis, and they were no longer anymore. But the rebirth back in 2018 means that we've got this absolutely glorious little stunner. If you're into vintage looking watches, but you want the reassurance of a new build, look no further. This is going to be an absolute classic, I feel. Now, as I say, I've had a ton of positive feedback from this watch. People on Instagram, people that I've met, my watch friends, have all looked at it, they've all liked it, and they think it's spot on, to be honest. Actually, if you look at the web page, they've had a lot of watch organisations, bloggers, whatever you want to talk about, some big hitters in the industry saying positives about this watch. So it's going to be an absolute classic in the making. I couldn't say that. I don't know that. But for me personally, I've worn this watch, I've experienced this watch, and it's been an absolute joy, to be honest. So they've stuck to the vintage sizings, which means two things. Unfortunately, one of them is negative and one of them is positive. So the wearability of this watch is absolutely spot on. And if you can get on board with a 39mm, I'm a big fan of 39mm watches. I've got my Christopher Ward, I've got my Globemaster, I've got a couple of others around that sizing, and it's just oh la la, spot on, which is great. But the downside of that is the actual readability of the watch. Now, to look at this watch and tell the time, that's quite easy, if you can tell the time, that is. But the sub-dials, for me, it is a small watch, it is a small face, and they are small dials, and you have to concentrate maybe a little more than you'd like to when you try to time something. For example, I was trying to time some eggs the other day, and I got a little bit frustrated with it, and I ended up just putting it on the iPhone to time it instead. So very small. I mean, does anyone actually buy a chronograph because it's a chronograph because they want to time things? I don't think they do they? It's nice to be able to do it, and it is a feature of the watch. So for me, it's just so small. Maybe it's my eyesight. I'm getting to a certain age where I might need gigs. I don't know. So this watch for me, I've chosen it on the rubber strap, and it is a good quality rubber strap. It's supple, it's easy to wear, it's comfortable, and when it's on the wrist, it curves around the wrist. It does everything that you'd want a good quality rubber strap to do. It's got the vintage vibe, it's got the perforated holes throughout it, which, historically speaking, I haven't been a particular fan of perforated holes, but on this one, they're quite delicate, they're quite fine, and I just think it adds to the absolute gloriousness that is this little gem. One thing I would say that is it's probably missed a bit of quality control, to be honest, is just on the buckle here. When it's on your wrist, one of the edges is really quite sharp, whereas the other one isn't. Now that is minor picking at faults, but it's like when you've got something in your tooth. When you know it's there, you poke it, you prod it, you feel it. It annoys you more and more the more you know it's there. And again, it's just a minor thing, but yeah, I just feel like I need to take a little bit of a fine sandpaper or just file it down just a little bit. But again, it's a really minor thing. So the looks on this watch are, well, it could be considered a Marmite watch. It won't be for everybody, but for me, it's just it makes me feel warm inside. It makes me feel like I'm wearing a vintage watch, but I know it can stand the modern rigors of, of today's society. I think it's a fantastic wearable watch. The bezel is aluminium, which you would expect in a watch of this design, and it goes in both directions. It hasn't got any clickability, if that's even a word. So it's not really a diving bezel. It is a timing bezel, but what I have noticed when I've been paying attention to the watches, going about my day-to-day business, is that I have actually knocked the bezel and it's out of sync. So if you were trying to time something, you went away, came back, those eggs that were boiled, they'd have been hard boiled, there wouldn't have been any runny bits, and I'd have been super pissed off. Now this watch, let's get to the value proposition. I frigging hate that phrase, but it is. It's £1,400 for it on the rubber strap. It's only an extra £100 if you want the mesh style bracelet, which probably would be my first choice, I think. But this rubber has been so comfy. But so for £1,500, £1,400, it's a lot of watch for your money. I think it's really good value, to be honest. It's got domed sapphire crystal, and again, it just adds to that vintage vibe. It's fantastic. The good thing is it's got a Sellita SW510 in it. Now these movements, the Sellita SW510, you get one that's an automatic, and you can hear the rotor in this. I hope you can hear that anyway. And you also get the exact same movement, but it's hand winding, a bit like the Omega Seedmaster, where you've got to wind it every day to keep it going. So that is a customer's preferential choice. I quite like the idea of a hand movement. It harks back to a vintage era, doesn't it? So it suits the watch well. But for me, the ease of automatic, if I'm honest, it's easier, so I like it more. 100-meter water resistance for this watch, which, as I say, it is an Aviator Sea Diver, so reliable, modern build quality, which is really important. And as I say, now let's get onto these stats. It's 39mm, but that's the bezel. It actually overhangs the case. The case is only 38mm, so it's a strange thing that we all say in the watch community, but we call a 39mm watch. It's either a small 39 or a big 39, and this is a small 39 for sure. The lugs are only 46.6, so again, that adds to the small 39ness. It's a 15mm thick watch, so it's relatively chunky for its other dimensions, and the lugs are 22mm. So again, overall, really good sizing, wearability. I've worn it. As I say, I went watch shopping in Manchester the other day, wore it around, it got attention. People like to look at this watch because they're not quite sure what it is or where it's come from. I could have told them it was 50 years older than original. And if you look on eBay or other places like that, there is watches that are 50 years old that are exactly like this, but they're not. They're old versions, not modern ones. So the too good, too bad about this watch. Let's start with the bad. Let's get them out of the way. And it is, unfortunately, what I've mentioned before, and it's those sub-dials and the readability and the way that you could actually use them on a day-to-day basis. It's a little bit more difficult than I want it to be, and that's simply because it's so small. And the hands, they're just polished, there's no loom on them, and they're quite delicate. So for me, is it the end of the world? No, because I've still got semi-decent eyesight, so I can read it. It's a little bit more difficult than I want it to be. And something that I haven't mentioned already is the crown. Now, obviously, it's an automatic watch, so I don't have to wind it every day, but when I have wound it, I found it more difficult than it should be to screw the crown back in. So it has got a screwing crown, again, modern build quality, but it's just a little bit more tricky and a little bit more difficult than I'd want it to be. So the too good about this watch are, well, I've said a lot of positives about it, to be fair, haven't I? But the looks and the vibe it gives you, that real blend of a genuine looking old-fashioned watch in modern build quality. So the looks and the vibe that this watch give me a warm fuzzy feeling inside, and I'm really enjoying it. And the second good about it is the fact that it's a genuine reissue, size-wise, looks-wise. As I say, look at them on eBay, or I think there's a couple of videos on YouTube, and they're nigh on identical. So I quite like that. I think that's a positive thing, that they've sort of stuck to the roots, stuck to the sizings, and rebought it out. Now that might not be for you. You might think that's cutting corners, cheating, not being very creative. For me, I think it's been a winner. But as I always say, guys, I really want to know what you guys think of this watch. Will it be for everybody? Well, no watch is it? I'll see you in the next one.